Okay, again, welcome everyone. If you could please drop 3 things in the chat, and Lily, if you want to put these instructions in the chat, that would be great. Name, where you're joining from, and then the third thing is why you're joining. So we see the 3 likely buckets of the reason that people would be joining might be because they have an endowment and they're looking to grow it, or secondly, maybe they're curious, endowment curious, and are thinking of starting one. Or maybe you just love Radically Rural and are just curious about anything, and just kind of want to learn. So there might be other things we're not considering, but those would be kind of the general direction we're looking for, because then our speaker can have a better idea of who is in the audience and how we can meet you there. All right, very good. Okay, so we warmly welcome Lea Ann Skogsberg, founder of Dollars and Cents for Nonprofit Success, a consulting firm which supports nonprofits with fundraising campaigns. I love the tagline, connecting donors to their dreams through nonprofits. So it's very donor friendly. And fun fact, as I was looking into it for her intro, Hannah Grimes and Dollars and Cents Consulting were founded the same year, 1997. So I would love to share a little bit about how this session came about, because all of the sessions through Radically Rural, whether it's a roundtable like this or whether it's our summit sessions, they all have a story, and always there's a really relational foundation to that story. So I want to share that. In 2021, early 2021, when I first started as Radically Rural director, we got a submission through our general contact form from a woman named Julie Buck, who is with the Community Foundation of Grundy County, and that is in Illinois, just right next to where Lea Ann is, pretty much, right? Yeah. And she was advocating for adding sessions or a track about philanthropy at Radically Rural. And so I met with her and have been in touch with her since then. And she came to Radically Rural this year for the first time. But when she and I first met and she was talking about all the different funding mechanisms and what we could talk about, she was talking about endowment. And she told me a story about someone in Illinois who endowed cookie dough. And that story is to be told later on by Lea Ann, who happened to have the firsthand account of that story. And so we ended up, I think it was 2021, Lea Ann, that we ended up opening a session slot for her that year that took place during a lunchtime. Mm-hmm. And she ended up very last minute not being able to come, but Lea Ann came and filled in for her for that session. And since then has come to Radically Rural 2 more times. And she even has become a coach on our local coaching roster, which is amazing. So, our clients in our region and elsewhere who access our coaching roster sometimes talk to Lea Ann in Illinois. And Lea Ann has been so kind to freely give of her decades of knowledge and experience and expertise to our community. The topic of endowment also came up when I was at a gathering of rural leaders at the Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group in March. And one of the gentlemen I was sitting with, who had been at fundraising for a long time, at one point, my attention perked up because he was like, sometimes donors just need to put a ring on it, like do an endowment already or something like that. And I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so I'm very, very happy to have her here. And so how today is going to flow is I'm going to kick us off with just a short facilitated conversation to kind of bring Lea Ann into the conversation. And then I will let her go through her PowerPoint, which is about, you said like 12, 15 minutes, something like that, within there. And then the rest of the time will be opened up for Q&A so that you all have a chance to ask your questions. And with that, hi, Lea Ann.
Hi, Juliana. I love sitting here listening to this because, yes, you and I go back to, I think, your first year at Radically Rural. And also, I sit here as a super fangirl of Radically Rural. And I have shared the Radically Rural link with so many clients from across the country. I just love Radically Rural.
Oh,
Super
amazing.
fangirl.
So my first question then is like, why? I guess what has your experience at Radically Rural been like? How do you feel like it connects with your work? Because everyone who comes has a different kind of connection point to Radically Rural. And why have you been so motivated to share about nonprofit fundraising with our community?
Um, so I believe Radically Rural approaches the structure of sessions and content in a way that is so much more innovative than most of the professional development opportunities I have a chance to sit in. And it's so on the ground, grassroots focused that I just love to come to Keene, which is not a metropolitan center. You know, you land at Manchester Regional, Boston Regional Airport, and you still have to drive an hour and a half just to get to Keene.
It's
My
true.
favorite raincoat comes from one of the women's boutiques sitting on the corner in Keene. I just love how there is this concept of thriving rural community. And some of my clients are in that rural community. I'm working with the county fair now, trying to assist them with an expansion project. And I'm from that arena. I was born in the rural community where I'm working on the county fair, actually. So it ties into a lot of where I come from. And also, I think, and this is a part of today's theme too, it respects rural communities for what they have to offer, just like
Mhm.
I believe in respecting middle income donors for what they have to offer. And so I think it melds all of those threads together for me in a mosaic that is just wonderful to be a part of as you continue to grow radically rural.
Amazing. Thank you. Um, and so I have just a couple of questions to kind of set the foundation of understanding about what an endowment is and what are the basics of how it works. But first, are you willing to tell the cookie story as a way to kind of get how it might look in the world?
So should I shift on the PowerPoint because that actually has a image to go with it that I think is relevant to the story.
Yeah, go for it. And then we can always unshare and share
Okay,
again.
so
Yeah.
um, can we see it? Can you see my slides yet? Because I went away on my view. Now I can't see my gallery.
I'll go ahead and share it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. You're going to share it?
Yep.
Because
Here we
it
go.
worked so well in our rehearsal.
It did, but
Um, okay, there it is, maybe. There it is. Okay, so it's the site. We don't need the intro slide. There's the intro slide. Everybody knows what the title of today's topic is.
Hmm.
Okay, so here is the chocolate chip cookie dough story. Um, and also to go back to your second question from the previous thread of conversation, I believe that as someone who's been in coaching and consulting for 28 of the um, 40 years that I have been doing this work, we have a responsibility to help make the sector as efficient and effective as possible. And one of those responsibilities is to make it possible for more people to be involved in a meaningful way for them. Not only
Hmm.
to assist the nonprofits, but because um, we as donors, and I include myself in this, almost everything I'm saying today comes from how I want to be treated as a donor. And I
Mm,
believe if you're in fundraising and you're not a good donor, please get out,
mm,
because we truly can't understand what it means to cultivate and nurture donors, the care and feeding of donors, if we're not donors ourselves. Because we need to understand how we need to be nurtured and cared for so that we can share those out to the nonprofits we support and call them short if they don't provide that kind of response to us. But also, if you are in consulting or coaching and working with a nonprofit portfolio, then that I believe is a value that needs to be inculcated to that group because this is really what encourages people to become involved in giving. So the chocolate chip cookie dough story. I happen to be enough to have a best friend who's a high net worth individual. One of the reasons and one of the ways to stay a best friend of a high net worth individual is you are a brick wall. Nobody gets to that person through you. Um, and so That person, though, being someone who understands the power of giving, had a desire when a new hospital was built in a community that's dear to both of us, because she had sat with her mom in last days of living as her mom was nearing the life end. She had wanted some element of humanity and some element of comfort in the hospital that was so sterile and so cold as her mom was passing away. And what she decided would be so cool was to have chocolate chip cookies coming out of the ovens for the patients who could have them, or, sugar-free chocolate chip cookies for the patients who needed dietary restrictions. Whatever. She wanted the humanity. So when the new hospital was being built and they were approaching her about a major gift, they said to her, "What would you like to do?" And she says, "I want to endow the chocolate chip cookie dough," because that had happened on certain days during her hospital experience. She wanted it to be an everyday thing. So I gave her an idea, and using the mechanics of what I believe in for endowment, we came up with a structure so she can endow the chocolate chip cookie dough at the new hospital.
Hmm.
So
I
every
love
day
that.
when the chocolate chip cookies got baked, and if she happened to be in the hospital visiting someone or there for a meeting because she was involved in the governance of the hospital, then she would get to smell her cookies.
Love that. And you're also like, I know you're going to talk about this later, but you're also so good about talking about how, um, you know, protecting the operations of a nonprofit, first, perhaps before going to more restricted type funding can be helpful. But in situations like this, when you have this personal story, something that you really, really care about and you want to see going forward into the future, it can be an amazing way to ensure that that happens, to be able to endow it.
Yes, she was afraid that at some point, if the hospital ever ran into financial challenges, one of the first things to go, just like arts and music in
Mhm.
our public schools, they would cut the
Yeah.
cookie dough. So
Yeah.
she figured if she endowed the cookie dough couldn't go away. Uh,
Yes.
so that was her theory.
Love that.
So
Um,
that's the cookie dough story.
Thank you so much. And just to tack onto that before we get into your presentation, can you define for us what is an endowment?
Endowments, if you Google it, are a financial fund, a set of financial funds that are created for in perpetuity support of an organization. They are most frequently associated with universities.
Mhm.
But as I will talk about and refer to today, I don't believe you need to be Harvard in order to have an endowment. It actually is a communication device that says to the folks who already know you, as well as to the region in which you serve, we're looking at the future, we're going to be around. So if we want to start to set aside some funds that say we're going to be here in perpetuity, then this is why we can mount this kind of an appeal or this kind of campaign. Endowments are a bit different than the typical thought of reserve funds, because reserve funds can be created by boards to serve short and midterm purposes, in that they can be spent down if there's a crisis and then replenished. My
Mhm.
strategy for working with endowments, um, and my approach, because I believe you endow the annual gift first before you go to a restricted giving or a program endowment, is that you can take care of both needs, or the primary need of most nonprofits, which is our operating budgets, and you endow your operating gift first. So as life invariably has us doing, we move on to another nonprofit relationship. We are leaving the nonprofit that for some point, some interval of time in our lives was so essential to how we were relating to the community in which we were raising our children, or pursuing the early phases of our career. Whatever it was, if you endow your annual gift, you leave the organization you love whole from the very beginning.
Hmm.
And then
Yeah.
it allows you to move on, because I think anyone on this call who's ever gotten an annual fund call, which they're usually in the fall, annual fund drives are usually in the fall, in
Mhm.
advance of year-end giving, and you look at the phone, you see who's calling, because we can all do that now with our phones, our smartphones, And you go, oh, I don't want to talk to that young alum. I don't want to talk to the museum in my backyard. I don't want to talk to, um,
Mhm.
whichever children's program may be calling me. But if you can endow your annual gift, you literally can get off of the
Mhm.
unending series of calls because you can create a time frame in which you endow it, and then you can say, okay, come at me with something else because I'm done with that.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. So last question before I let you take it away in your PowerPoint. So let's say that I come to you and I'm like, I don't have a lot, but I would like to do an endowment for my local shelter or something like that. Like, how does one do that? How do you even start?
Um, on the nonprofit side, I think you have to decide whether you have the internal expertise to manage creating and growing an endowment fund with multiple donors. And
Mhm.
if you don't have that, then you need to go out. I highly recommend the community foundations that now basically cover every zip code in the country. And that is one of the things they were created for, is to manage these types of special purpose funds. Some of them you will have to educate after you hear me today if you buy into what I believe about endowing an annual gift before you go to a special purpose endowment. You may have to educate them about that aspect of it, but you can go to them and work with them on whatever criteria that they require in order to create an endowment fund. On the donor side, you have to decide, okay, what is my annual gift? Um, what I love about my approach is it can be scaled to any size of gift. And just to give you a rough example, if you want to endow an annual gift of $100, that you can do over a 10-year pledge period, and you can do it for less than $3,000 a year. And if you want to break that out on a credit card, like a set it and forget it approach, then you can do it for about $255 a month and go. And then you can also change that pledge period and change the amount that you are setting up as a recurring monthly gift on your credit card to any pledge period you want. And I think that gives you a lot of flexibility of thinking about how you might want to become involved in endowment. What I got really sick and tired of when I came up with this strategy about 10, 10 to 15 years into my work in the nonprofit space was I got sick and tired of going to professional development conferences and sitting around at tables with colleagues going, I wish I knew Bill Gates or I wish I knew Oprah. They're not
Mhm.
going to fund what you do. And I also eventually came to see it as a disrespect for the donors who love us.
Mm.
If we are not trying to empower the people who already come to the table wanting to support our work, and
Mhm.
we just simply keep telling those donors, we wish we knew rich people and you're not them, then
Mhm.
we're not incentivizing our donors to stay with us and grow with us as we more fully realize what we might mean in our own backyard. And so
Yeah.
I think it's both the programming side of what it means to deliver mission, but I also think that part of that mission is to empower the donors who have made it possible for us to be created, more importantly, to grow.
Amazing. And so if I could just skim these list of answers, because like I know a lot of the folks on this call, some of them I met for the first time this year through Radically Rural, some are here in my local communities, some I don't know yet or haven't met, but I'll skim the chat for you just so you have this context when you're going into your presentation. Um, so we have someone who wants to help a nonprofit that she's on the board of.
Yep.
Um, Another one is a nonprofit ED just wanting to learn. Another one says, we're in, ooh, this person's in Alaska. Hello, welcome. We're about to set up a non-endowed fund at our local community foundation and looking for strategies to add money to it. And then we have brand new to this, but would love for my young organization to plan around endowments. Another one says, growing endowment knowledge and procedurals from an advancement perspective. Um, Someone else says here to learn for a nonprofit that she's on the board of. Someone else says wanting to grow our fundraising efforts. They're a small nonprofit. Looking to learn about endowments. We don't currently have one. And that's Main Street Skowhegan, which has done some really amazing things in the last, I don't know how many years. And so then it looks like someone else is learning about growing an endowment. Someone says endowment curious. And
I love that phrase, endowment curious.
yeah, interested in building a scholarship fund. See how we can help our community journalism partners think about diversifying their revenue. And then last one, looking for
Yes.
information on for as creative districts think through their structure and funding possibilities. So that's for the Nebraska Arts Council. So yeah, a pretty like, mix of folks, but I can go ahead and share my screen, Lea Ann, and just let you take it away.
Okay. And I really want to jump on the community journalism one because I think this is a concept that would work for, instead of saying the annual gift, subscriptions. I think you could use this to endow a subscription
Mm,
value, the dollar amount of an annual subscription for a newspaper to give the newspaper enough room to have the flexibility to continue to operate without undue influence. And I say this from a very long-term background. My dad was a newspaper pressman. My master's degree is in journalism. And the
that's
way,
cool.
I love, in fact, that was one of my original interests in Radically Rural was the focus on community journalism and independent. Oh, I love whoever did the heart. I love the idea that we could possibly restore independent, objective journalism and not the focused and biased content that we're getting from so many of the narrowly focused ownership of newspaper
Mm.
vehicles today. So I
Job
would love
navigating
to
that in a
see it.
diplomatic way.
I'm
Uh,
trying because yeah, I have a lot of strong. I'm Woodstein. I grew up during Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein's um, emphasis or activities during Watergate. So I have a very strong
mm,
desire to help resuscitate journalism as an objective investigative news tool that protects our communities, sometimes from ourselves. So
Amazing.
anyway,
So I will, Lea Ann, what I'll do is I'll just flag you when we have like 5 minutes left to make sure we have some time for Q&A, but I'll go ahead and share my screen now and you can take it
okay.
away.
Um, so let's go to the third slide because I just want to give a shout out here. Betsy is my best friend. Won't give you her last name. Um, and then the three others that this particular concept of giving was inspired by, which was I worked for a community college, and I had three donors who had the wherewithal to write $25,000 checks. And one was the widow of one of the founders of the college. Another was a grieving father who lost his son who was in college at the point of he was attending community college and he died in a tragic car accident. This father wanted to preserve his memory, and then I had a World War II vet. And the idea was we, at some point for all of us, our name will be spoken for the last time. If we engage and make possible the opportunity to name endowments for people we love, that last time will occur a lot later because people will speak their names or will at least be able to read about the reason these endowments got created. And I think that whole piece of legacy for those we love is an important part of this. We are all, I think, as a group of human beings, we want to believe that we're going to have made an impact during our lifetimes, and we'd like that impact to be noted beyond our lifetimes. Okay, next slide. So I've called today's program Endowment for Everyone, Endowment for the Small and Mid-Sized Organization, but I thought about calling today's program Endowment for Nearly Everyone, because if you Google, it'll say that endowments aren't for every organization. True. At the very startup phase, when you're just trying to keep the doors open, you're not in a position to create an endowment. But I will say that this endowment, this idea of endowing an annual gift was used for the community college. I had a president of my foundation board, and she couldn't write a five-figure check. So she wanted, though, to know that the endowment she was setting up in her, I think it was her mother's name, maybe it was her parents. But anyway, she wanted to know that once she gave the gift, it would go on forever. And so we came up with this idea of endow the gift that's going to be used this year, add to it a piece for investment, and then go forward. And that was why I didn't want to call it endowment for nearly everybody, because yes, there are some organizations as well as some donors it might not meet the needs for, but in general, the whole idea is instead of just working with high net worth individuals, this opens up the pool of prospects for whom the invitation can be issued to bring them to the table to discuss endowment. It opens it up to a much broader segment of the population of those who love our organization. And since I'm one of those middle income individuals, I wanted to be invited to the table. And so I did this partially out of selfish reasons because I have used my own strategy to create a $10,000 endowment for my first client, as well as empowered that community college foundation president to create a scholarship in perpetuity for her mom, dad, or parents. As I said, the giving heroes and heroines in that third slide, they could write the full checks, but I became directly aware, even beyond my own personal experiences, so many people might be interested in doing this, but they could not make a five-figure gift, but they might be able to make a four-figure gift, or as I gave in the example about the $100 endowment, a three-figure gift. And they might be able to do it over time. And if we factored in time, we'd get there. So this essentially shows that the giving is coming out of our current income rather than accumulated assets. It also means we can start earlier. So let's go to the next slide.
I'm ready for you.
Okay. So the prospect profile, these are all the different kinds of segments within the donor population that I think this can appeal to. And that's what makes the CRMs that are out there, and there's so many of them, but the CRM investment can become more valuable to an organization if they use it to identify prospects and donors who meet certain criteria that you can frame as prompts. Now using AI, which I'm trying to get better at, and I encourage everybody else on the call, remember, if we use AI as a hammer in our hand, it will not become a hammer to hit us. So if we think of it as a tool, then it becomes something we control rather than being controlled by it. And I think that writing prompts for your own CRM to identify these segments of your donor population, then you can start to match up the pieces of your program that go with the interests of those who are already investing in your mission. And that can be, in terms of the annual gift, anyone who's given to you for 3 years in a row or 3 of the last 5 years. In other words, they have made a conscious decision to transact a gift in support of your work. That population to me is worthy of this conversation because, again, they're the very people who, because they have an annual relationship with you, they might like to get off of the annual fund train that's coming through the tunnel, and you look down the tracks and all you see is the headlight of the locomotive. They might like a chance to complete that relationship rather than to have it coming at them for 20 or 30 years. And this ties into that whole opportunity to let a donor feel like they finished a piece of their work with you. Whether or not they stay with you and become involved in a different major gift process, or whether or not they move on to another nonprofit, Everybody gets to feel good. And you no longer look at your phone and are not picking up for the annual phone call. Okay, next slide. This just gets into structure, and talking about pledge structure makes it possible. Time makes it possible. So this is the one factor that many major gift callers don't think about when they're going out on the major gift call. They're not thinking about giving an extended timeline to structure the gift. They're thinking about walking out with the check today. And I will also say that my personal experience of offering someone the chance to make a gift, a donor, Ivy in that first slide of mine about the heroes and heroines, when I went to call on Ivy, whose husband, with her support, had helped. This was a time when the women weren't actually involved in the decision making and the governing, but she had been a support to him by taking care of the kids and making sure dinner was on the table when he was off trying to help found the community college movement. So she felt very involved in the process, and no one thought she had any money because she lived very simply. She wore polyester pants, but my mom and my grandma wore polyester pants. She had a very simple house. All I did was go to her and say, I want you to know how you can make this annual $500 award available forever. And she says, well, how much is that going to take? And I said, $25,000. And she looked at me, she flipped open her checkbook. Now, I'd been there for about 2 hours. We had cried, we had laughed, we had done a whole bunch of relationship building in that evening. She flipped open her checkbook, she looked at me and she goes, should I do one or two? And that taught me forever that we should never assume what someone can do when it matters to them about the investment, the philanthropic investment we're making. I looked at her and I said, we came to talk about one. There's plenty of time for you to consider the second one. I could have easily walked out of that house that night with $50,000. I walked out with 25. And the people in the governing structure of the community college who had never cared enough to respect her enough to offer her this invitation and tell her how to sustain that gift in a renewable way to honor her husband were shocked. And what happened was, after Ivy passed away a few years later, her son and daughter endowed the other 25,000, and now both awards are given in honor of their parents. So this goes back to respecting the donor, not making assumptions about what they can or can't do because of how they live their lifestyle. So next slide. And I know I'm mixing things up here a little bit because Ivy had the financial capacity to write the check in one single transaction. But my point today is, if you have that group of donors, great. Go invite them, go enable them and empower them to make those gifts. But this is to open up a wider segment of your donor population to be able to consider being involved with you in this long-term meaningful way. Again, when we think about pledge periods, they're scalable and they should be both reflective of what the donor needs to do over time and what the organization needs for itself. I'm not asking the organization to give up all of their priorities and all of their goals and objectives. I'm just saying, come together in some sort of meeting of the minds and in a collaborative partnership way of process. Because if you're going to be around as a long-term organization anyway, then you have the opportunity to work with donors who have a variety of interests and needs that can be expressed in their giving if we give them options. So the one thing we can't control, and that's certainly changed over the length of time that I've been working with these programs, is the interest rate. We cannot control that. We have to live with it. And then your policies about naming rights and all of that. If you're going to get into this, I do encourage you all to come up with a naming rights policy set of policies so that you are consistent. Being consistent is more important than the minimum thresholds that you set for naming policies. Just make sure you're not offering one donor one thing and one donor something else. People want to believe that they're all being treated the same way, no matter where they are in terms of their overall financial profile. Next.
Awesome. And just about 5 minutes left.
Okay, I will run. Um, so again, this is just another way of summarizing the tangible benefits for the donors, the increase in the number of people you can talk to, also the ability to have this wonderful cultivational experience for the donors and the organization. You can bring people into a conversation about what it means to give and let them see the impact of their giving. Next. The intangible benefits are introducing way earlier than the wills and estates conversation. I'm not a big fan of the phrase plan giving, and some of you on this call maybe. I've been around this work long enough that I've decided I like certain things and I don't like certain things. So I like the idea of gift planning more than plan giving. I think plan giving sounds like an old-fashioned term, whereas I think gift planning sounds like it's more modern. And actually, any gift that you make is planned, whether or not you planned it for 5 minutes or whether or not you planned it for 5 months or 5 years. It's a planning process. And so I like to invite people into the gift planning process, and that allows them to do it. One of my favorite phrases is give while you live. It's a lot more fun. I've never seen a car go to a cemetery to have a handshake. So if we get people into the mindset of giving while they're alive and using their resources while they're alive to further the missions of the nonprofits they love, yes, they may leave us something in their will and estate, and that's great. But if they don't, look at how much fun we had working with them while they were here.
Mhm.
So much more fun, just like walking on the stage at Radically Rural. So much more fun to be there in person. So
Yep.
younger donors get to be involved and get to experience the three hormone release of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, and that in and of itself can create this desire to be involved long term in the giving process because it feels so good to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, next slide. This is how many people I've been privileged enough to work with over the life of my work on endowing annual giving and working on the concept of middle income donors being players at the table. So I only hope that ceiling is going to grow. And that's why, as I said, it's a passion project for me to be talking about this. And I'm one of those people. So, okay.
Amazing.
This is just kind of a summary slide on capacity, but what can you do with all this? General operations. I don't put general ops at the bottom because it is the most important thing we do. If we can't keep the doors open, our long-term investment funds matter to no one. We got to
Yeah.
keep the doors open first. That's why we endow, in my opinion, and why we encourage people to think about endowing their annual gift. And then it gets into designated purpose, and then the sky is the limit in terms of what can we think about. I had one organization want to endow their birthday party function because it was a long-term care facility, because birthday parties meant a lot to the people who lived at the facility. That was
Yeah.
a big deal. And if they ran into financial challenges, that again, it could be one of the first things cut. So we really need to be creative when we let organizations think about what they want to endow. It may not be an annual gift per se, but it can be a line item in the annual budget that then you pool a bunch of donors together and let their individual gifts come together, and you create the endowment approach for that particular line item fund, rather than with just one individual's giving, but with a group of individuals who all want to make sure that stays, that quality of life opportunity stays present in that community. Okay, I think we're at the end. Yeah, that's just me. Okay,
You did it.
I did it.
Amazing. Wonderful.
And can
So
I just thank Amy? Amy, thank you for all of your encouraging looks. I loved it. You were really getting me going. So thank you very much for participating with your encouraging um, looks as I was giving different points.
It really does matter for those who haven't spoken on one of these before. Sometimes you just feel like you're like going into the void, like you you don't know where you are. So it's super helpful. Um,
Yes, super
okay,
helpful.
great. So I'm gonna skim the chat for any questions we already have, and anyone willing to come off their camera at this point so we can have a full conversation would be amazing, but it's okay if you can't. And so I will see if there's already any questions, and then if not, we'll just open it up. So Andrea says, how do you know when you're not in the startup phase anymore to then pursue the endowment?
Um, when you're not, I would say some level of sustainability and renewability that you have been able to count on for 1 to 3 years, so that you do not continuously feel like every single gift that's coming through the door is uh, literally feast or famine. That you're making payroll on a consistent basis. The organization where we use this as our approach to launch an endowment campaign, we'd been in existence for like maybe 15 years at that point. And this is an organization where, and I was president of the board that hired the executive director that got us to that point. At the point that I hired, that my board, I didn't do it by myself, my board hired the executive director, we were holding bake sales to keep the payroll taxes current. So we had come from a very, very modest beginning. We were in an office with no windows in another nonprofit space using one windowless office to run the entire organization. And so in that 15-year time span, we had grown to where we were able to not be starving. We were no longer holding bake sales to keep our payroll taxes paid. And at that point, we said, we want to think about how to say to our community, we're going to be around for the long haul. This is one new revenue channel that we want people to know we are launching as a demonstration of the fact that we are here and that our clients and constituents, as well as our donors and prospects, can rely on us to be here tomorrow.
Awesome. And then we have Amy asks, what's the rationale for directing recurring donations to an endowed fund versus just sending to the org directly? So her org accepts recurring monthly donations for the nonprofit news website.
Um, Again, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things that I've heard specifically from the um, voices trying to reestablish the independent journalism voice is that they don't have long-term funds for making investments that will allow their operations to grow. And I think that people who really care about independent journalistic voices would understand that we not only need the annual subscription, which could stop at any time, but we need the financial long-term backing under that subscription so that if, heaven forbid, you walk out in front of the proverbial bus, the resources to sustain the investigative journalism is still there or are still there.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, good. We have lots of questions coming in.
Oh, good.
Asta says, have you seen any nonprofits that do not have many individual donors build endowment funds using your strategy? Endowment with purpose becomes a separate restricted fund that can only be used for that purpose, correct? So it looks like two separate questions.
Well, again, if you approach the creation of endowment from endowing the annual gift, then it's going to go into an annual operating endowment. So therefore, the earnings on that endowment are going to be available to the operating budget. Then, during the cultivational period that the annual gift gets underwritten with endowed funds, the organization has the opportunity to educate the donor about other restricted opportunities for endowments. So did that answer the question? The first, using the basic premise that I think is my contribution to thinking about endowments and reserves funds is endow the annual gift first before you shift people to permanent restricted endowments.
Asta, did that answer the question?
Or if she'd like to rephrase it, I would be happy to try again.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. I work with many organizations and I am wondering whether endowment is applicable for certain business models, but not for others. That sometimes thinking about setting up endowment might be very difficult for organizations that only work, for example, on cost reimbursable grants, and they don't really have a list of individual givers. That was one of the premises of the first question. And the second question was really more in reaction to some of the things that you've said, that certain endowments can be for certain purposes. And of course, my accounting hat and internal auditor hat automatically thinks about a restriction that is automatically applied. And if you towards those funds, does that mean that when you receive interest on that particular endowment, you can only spend that interest towards capital purchases, for example, if the purpose was capital? Those are the two things that were running through my mind as I was listening to you sharing.
As I said, creating the general operating endowment and then having those first gifts and the group of donors underwrite long-term investments that make that fund viable then should take care of the question about restriction. Philosophically, organizations that are completely reliant on grant funding, I believe, need to be encouraged to develop an individual donor pool because, as we have especially seen this year, those grant resources can become unreliable in terms of continuing the mission of an organization. So if you put all of your eggs in the grant bucket, and that's where I started my career, was writing grant applications for higher ed. But if those grant funds suddenly dry up, or more frequently, it's like, a major funder will give you 3 years in a row, but they say, hey, you got to take a year off and then you've got to come back. What do you do in the off year? How do you fund your mission and your programs? So I think that's where individuals become a meaningful focus of revenue channel development, because an individual can fund anything, including the electric bill. And as I like to tell people all the time, no one wants to work in the dark. And the most informed and insightful donors understand that a strong infrastructure is necessary to funding the ongoing work of any nonprofit.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't object to funding the electrical bill, and they shouldn't object to funding the salaries of the professional staff that make it possible for the work to take place in a responsible and accountable, evidence-based outcome way.
Yeah. And as a side note, Asta's with Social Impact Commons. We had them as a speaker in the Sharing Bonanza this year, and they do very, very cool work for like fiscal sponsorship and other like nonprofit infrastructure sharing, which is super cool.
Thank you, Jill. I'm glad to hear.
And then Grace Northern had a comment: journalism moves fast, donor relationships move slow. We've got some echoing of that. And then Tiffany says, what is the smallest endowment that can still make sense for utilizing the funds each year? Our charitable organization sticks to a 3% distribution amount, from what I understand. So 3% of a small fund doesn't add up to much.
That is a subjective decision that organizations are going to have to approach from the standpoint of, in the beginning, it may not have a large impact on your work, but like any type of long-term investing strategy, what can it mean over time if you start to direct and educate donors about the power of endowing, again, the operating fund first, so that in times of peaks or times of wealth, feast and famine. In times of feasting, you can put more money into the investment. And then when you do have a slowdown in giving or we go through a recession, there are resources there that you can utilize. As I said, this is a concept that sort of merges the basic frequently thought of as independent concepts of endowment and reserves. It works together.
Awesome. Thank you. Tiffany, did you have any follow-on question to that, or does that make sense? Oh, we've got a thank you in the chat, so I think that's good.
Okay.
And
You're
then
welcome.
so the other Amy asks, very newbie question to, hi, and your little thing said West Virginia, something Alliance, right? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, West Virginia Hope and Action Alliance.
Very cool. Welcome.
Yes.
So she says, very newbie question to endowments, as this is all new to our org. Where is the best place to start to set up an endowment fund? We have in the town that I live in a community foundation. Do foundations cover just regions? Or I think you said it truly isn't restrictive by that region. Is that correct?
The reason why I asked, so I'm very familiar with our community foundation here, and I know they set them up, but our organization is statewide, West Virginia wide.
Mm.
And again, I think that is your own comfort level on who do you feel like you can get
Oh, yeah.
the most direct financial guidance from, and set up I would set my investment funds up for management. If you don't have the internal expertise to set them up and manage
No.
on your own at your own banking institution, then go to the community foundation
Yep.
that's closest to you and get their criteria for what they require as minimums and see what they are willing to work with you to set up and carry out. Because yes, there are written policies, but there's always flexibility in those policies if they really like where you're going.
Okay, thank you.
There are the
Awesome.
rules, and then there is what actually can happen.
And then to go along with that. So like ours would be more attractive to donors in our region, but if we wanted to go statewide, I'm guessing we'd want to go to, there's another huge one in Charleston, which is our capital, a huge foundation there that maybe would draw more people to donate to. Would that be a strategy to look at?
Yes, it sounds like it. I mean, I'm not quite sure how your
Yeah.
mission works to impact the whole state because you have a physical primary presence in one region. But depending on how that all works together, you would want to come up with an appeal design that leverages both your physical presence in one location, but your impact across the state.
Gotcha. Oh yeah,
Okay.
that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
So those are all the questions in the chat, but we do have time. It's 2:55, so we have 5 minutes. If there's another quick question, we can take that. Does anyone have questions or thoughts? All right, that's a good sign. So thank you all so much for coming. Lea Ann, thank you so much for so generously sharing your time and expertise with us, and for sticking with the Hannah Grimes and Radically Rural community for so long. And yeah, so for all of you, if you want to follow our newsletter, you'll get notified about other opportunities like this that come up. And if you want to reach out for more questions to Lea Ann, she had her contact info up there as well. But yeah, I hope you all have a wonderful day today and great to see you.
Thank you, Juliana.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Oh, and bye, Lillian.